Hey friends, welcome back. This is Ashley with Uncommon Roots Homestead, and today I'm here with my amazing friend Jill. We're actually in Alabama right now recording season 2 of our podcast, which is the Stewarding Well podcast. We're super excited.
Yeah.
It's been, you guys know, we started the podcast project almost exactly a year ago.
Yeah.
We had the first conversation, and it's just kind of been a passion project of ours, and we have rolled out I think like 7 episodes at this point, and we're really excited to kind of get through some of these topics and have some of these conversations.
Yeah.
We have some cool guests, and we're just really excited for you guys to get to experience what we've been working on for a long time.
Yeah, and I think it's fun to bring in those guests, right? And have conversations from all different sides of the table, which is kind of like what our podcast is, right? It's like have a seat at the table,
Right.
having conversations in love and grace, and it's been really cool. And a lot of times we sit on the opposite side of that table too.
Yeah.
And so that has been fun to just kind of navigate that in our friendship and invite you guys along to listen to that. And so many of you guys are listening to that. So just a little real quick, like thank you guys so much. When you pour a lot of work and time into something and you're passionate about it, you put in the work. But then when you see how well it's been received and how it's impacting the listeners, it makes it worthwhile, right? Like it makes you want to keep coming in and having trips like this where we're just spending the weekend working on it. And so thank you guys so much, everyone who listens to it. We just really appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's been something, you know, when Jill and I first started talking about starting a podcast, and that's not the purpose of this video. I actually want to I want to take this opportunity and like kind of interview Jill and ask her some questions I think you guys might have kind of in the back of your heads too. But just before we get to that, you know, when we started talking about a podcast, we were talking about like why would we do this, right? Like Jill has her platforms, and I share a lot of our story on Instagram and on YouTube. And we're like, what's the purpose of having another platform? And the purpose was to really like open a space to have conversations that are maybe a little bit uncomfortable. And we've been able to do that.
Yeah.
And I think coming into season 2, we're doing that even more. I mean, we are hitting the ground running. Our first episode in January is called To Meet or Not to Meet. And yes, we're talking about animal consumption, and we're talking about it with a vegan, and I think that conversation really sets the tone for where we want to go in season 2, and kind of like the grace that we want to offer each other as we kind of navigate these hard conversations. So we're really excited, but I want to talk to you, Jill, because you're kind of a rock star. She's kind of famous. I mean,
I'm normal, y'all. I'm very normal.
I don't know. Should we define normal?
That's true.
No, but Jill, you know, I was thinking kind of about you and your story and kind of the way that you've built your life and the way that you share it with all of your followers. And I was thinking, you know, you offer a lot of advice to people, and you have gone through a lot of stages, and I'm sure that you've shared like your top advice before, but I want to ask you, like today, what is the top piece of advice that you would give to a new gardener?
Oh, that's a good one. And it's hard, right? Because when you think about advice, there's like so many things that like my brain kind of goes to. But if I'm offering like what I feel like is valuable advice, you know, because you can give advice, but then if you think about it, like, okay, what if they actually took that advice and applied it today? Did I set them up in the right direction?
Right.
And in the past, I would have probably said, just like do it, right? Jump in and do it. There's value in starting, and there is. But I will tell you, for a beginner gardener, if I were to give that advice today, you would probably get overwhelmed and you'd probably fail, and you might be so discouraged that you wouldn't try again. So that would not be the advice Jill today would give. The advice I would give today would be start small. There is value in starting small and figuring it out. And so start, absolutely, but figure out that one thing you want to grow and figure out what your purpose is for growing it, right? Like if you're wanting to reduce your budget, then maybe figure out food that your family grows and say, okay, this year I'm going to emphasize on green beans because that is something I'm buying every single, you know, week when I go to the grocery store. Start small, learn how to grow green beans really well, and then when you've figured out how to grow those, how to, you know, preserve those, however you choose to do that, then maybe, you know, the next season move into something else. And don't just overwhelm yourself with all these things, because there's going to be, you know, trellising you're going to have to do, you're going to have pests that you're going to come in contact with that you're going to have to figure out, and then you have not only the work that the garden requires of you, But then you have the work that the preservation requires of you as well. And so for me, I find that the fall garden doesn't require as much as far as work or preservation, because a lot of the things I grow are just storage crops, right? I harvest and I just store them, they're very hands-off. But the summer garden is very hands-on as far as maintenance, pruning, trellising, tending to, and then the preservation is a lot more in-depth. You're either, you know, pressure canning, you're water bath canning, you're dehydrating, you're doing all of these other things that just require a lot. And so don't be ashamed by starting small, embrace that, and know that you're actually making yourself a better gardener in the long run by starting small and figuring out what you're capable of, you know, taking on and just learning and navigating in that season. I know when I was starting out, I looked at other people that I followed, the people I was influenced by, and I saw how they did this on a large scale, and like, I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And so I dove head first, and I sunk, is really what happened, because I was new and they weren't. They had been gardening for several years, and I was seeing the abundance of what, you know, several years had paid off and looked like. And so I thought I could do those things, and I quickly realized I couldn't. And you shouldn't have to. There shouldn't be any guilt associated with not having a large garden. Even if that just looks like some green stalks in a container, you can grow a lot of food. You can grow a lot of green beans. You can grow a lot of lettuce and chards and other things like that. You can even grow tomatoes, or, I mean, really the sky's the limit on what you can do in those things as well. And just don't be discouraged by that. Find value in that and really take that time to build your knowledge. And then as your space grows, your knowledge will begin to grow as well.
That's such a good point. And I think like one thing that you said was, you know, kind of figure it out on a small scale. And I think that also includes like figuring out what you like or don't like. Like you might get into it and be like, wow, I absolutely hate processing tomatoes. Like I do not ever want the amount of tomatoes that would require processing. And like if you started with the amount of tomatoes that Jill gets out of her garden, if I today had the amount of tomatoes that Jill gets out of her garden, I would be like so over my head. I mean, I think about the space that I have, and Jill's garden is probably, how many times bigger is your garden than mine, you think? You've been in my garden.
Yeah.
And I have a big garden, like I have a big garden.
I mean, it's probably at least 3 times bigger.
At least 3, probably 4, probably 4 or 5 times. Like she's dealing with, and that's like so, and that's not including the high tunnel or like the backyard spaces. Like she's got at least like 5 or 6 times more growing space than I have. And I think about the abundance that I have and like kind of like where my limit is and what I like. And you know, Jill and I were talking the other day, I was like, you know, I don't really think I want a bigger garden. Like I don't actually want to grow more than I have right now, because I'm in a good place where I enjoy the harvest, I enjoy the preservation, I enjoy the ability to gift, but it's like manageable. And so and like there are limits, and I don't think you know that as a new gardener. So start small is such good advice, because that way you're not like, even if you just started with a 4x8 bed, which is what I started with, if I would have like chalked that full, like you end up with all of a sudden you have all this produce you didn't have before, and you have to figure out how to use it. And if you've never gardened before, then like you're figuring out, how do I need to eat differently to like maybe I didn't eat cucumbers every 5 seconds, and now I have enough to like eat cucumbers every 5 seconds for whatever. And I know we're into the fall, so that's not really applicable right now, but it's like if you're thinking about gardening and you are a little intimidated by a fall garden, so you want to start in the spring, like be kind of thinking about that, because there's a lot of
and your budget shifts too, depending on how you want to preserve. So like, you know, if you're water bath canning, which some people would say some vegetables you don't need to do that on, you know, that's pretty cheap. But if you're talking about a pressure canner, or maybe you're wanting to vacuum seal and you need some sort of food saver, maybe you're wanting to like have a freeze dryer or something like that, those are
expensive. They're investments.
They're investments. And so one, if you don't want to invest in what you need to preserve it, if you don't even prefer the taste of it, and so those are definitely things that it's a learning curve, and you got to figure that out. And definitely I think starting small is just good advice that's not given often enough.
Well, and like don't be afraid to start and stay small. And that's like, nobody talks about that. We're always like, how do you scale it? What are you gonna do next year? And I'm like,
who said you had to scale?
Like, I feel good about that. And like the only, like when I think about scaling what I'm doing, and I've talked to you guys about this, I just want to like spread stuff out a little bit. I don't actually want to grow more. I just want to spread a little bit more. Like I made some bad decisions this year, which I think everybody does in their first year gardening in a new space. You make not even bad decisions, but decisions you won't make again. And so like maybe it'll change, but like I don't want to grow it. So that's okay. You might like have a 4x8 garden and like that's all you want, and that's okay. Like that's, you're still a gardener.
Yep, absolutely. You're still a gardener. Scale does not mean anything, just depending on your goals.
Yeah.
You know, and like we scale because that's how we choose to run our farm.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like for you have a full-time job. Kevin has a full-time job. It's like it wouldn't even make sense for you, and more than likely it would put you in a space where you wouldn't even want to go to the garden, which is also really important, because some of you guys may be starting a garden just for your own joy and entertainment. It makes no sense to do this large thing and then get overwhelmed and feel like you're defeated. And so definitely, if you're holding on to any nugget from this video, let it be like there's nothing wrong with being small and staying small.
Yeah. When you mentioned goals a second ago, so I want to kind of pivot and ask you another question. So I know from following you, I keep up with keeping up with the Reagans. But I know from following you that you are transitioning a little bit in like kind of what your focus is on and what you've been posting on. You're doing a lot with flowers, and I saw that you and Sean from Mindful Farmer, Arkansas, just released a course.
We did.
So tell me all about the flowers. Like, what is this shift?
Yeah, it was kind of a shift that happened, and it wasn't like an intentional happening, right?
Yeah.
So we just recently moved farms, and the farm we lived at before, I knew I wanted to up flowers, mainly because I wanted to grow my knowledge. So I've been growing vegetables for 9 years now, and I know quite a bit about it. I went to school for agriculture. I've taken plant science classes. I've taken, soil courses. Like, I've done a lot on digging in and really kind of knowing what I need to know about vegetables. Then I would grow flowers, and they were really pretty, but I didn't know a whole lot. And so I spent an entire year growing flowers, learning, researching, doing all the things I needed to do. And as I was kind of doing that, I was like, wow, I like this. But coming from the purpose of our farm is for production. So we do grow for our family, but our intention is to sell, and that's what I do for my job. I get to share it with you guys on here, but we're also selling the things. And so Sean has grown professionally, and he really upscaled flowers and sells that, and the revenue in that is way higher than the revenue in produce. And there are learning curves that is totally different. And so when you're thinking about the value and what you can get in square footage and things like that, that was kind of how the shift happened. It's like, one, I really want to grow my knowledge and just be widespread, right? Like, I want to know a lot of things about a lot of different things. And so that was kind of what sparked the interest. And then when I realized the market that I had in my area, the lack of other farmers doing particular varieties, I thought, well, I can really kind of hone in on this. There's really no one in my area that is doing dahlia production.
Right.
And so that's something Sean and I are doing moving forward in the new year. We are building out a dahlia collection, how to figure out how to grow them.
I'm super excited
about it. And that's a year-long experiment that we're just like buckled into to figure out, because our community needs it. No one's doing it. No one's taking the time to kind of experiment with that. And so those are things that we're doing. We just recently launched a flower course, just with all the knowledge we know. We're going to keep expanding upon that. But really, it just made a lot of sense for us as a business. We co-farm with Sean and his wife, Melanie. And so it was just it made a lot of sense for both of us. We still do a lot of vegetable production, but we just marry the two in the garden.
Yeah.
So it's kind of half and half. And I think what we have found is how beneficial they are for each other.
Yeah.
And how you can have one thing coming out. So the summer garden came out, we put in overwintered flowers. They'll come out early spring to where we can replant our summer crops. So there's always flowers and vegetables in the garden, but one's never taking away from the other. So we really are able to just like use them to benefit each other, and they really do. A lot of the things that come to the flowers are super beneficial for the vegetables, and it looks aesthetically really pleasing when you go into the garden, and they both serve great purposes. But for us, it made more sense with our long-term goals and some of the things we're trying to achieve on our farm to kind of switch into flower production, and the demand in our area is just really needed.
Yeah, well, and what you were talking about with like moving crops in and out and kind of like having that timeline, that keeps your soil a lot healthier too, because you're not worrying about like overwintering the soil as much, because it's actually like producing life during that time. So that's helpful too.
Yeah, it's been really fun, and we'll always grow vegetables. We still sell vegetables. We donate a lot of our produce vegetables after we have put up for our family, and so there's definitely a place in that. It's also valuable, but we are kind of shifting gears a little bit, and I actually find that I'm enjoying it more, and I think it's because I'm still learning. It's like I'm learning something new. It's new and exciting, and it's just been really fun to do it.
Okay, so last question. What thing, or I don't know, season or whatever, what is coming up that you're most excited about in the next 12 months?
Oh, that is hard. I definitely think the dahlias because I've never grown dahlias on a large scale.
And they're gorgeous.
They're gorgeous. Yeah, we grew some dahlias in our tunnel this year, but we really were trying to work out soil issues, and so it was kind of a flop. Like, we weren't able to save any of the tubers from them. And so this year we've been like building out these collections that we were like having shipped in. And I think for me, when I think about the dahlias, it's fun and exciting, but I know that it's going to be a season of so much growth and learning, and like, I love that. I love to learn. And so I think that that's what I'm excited about, is moving into something that I'm passionate about, I found a love for, then I get to just spend the next year learning about something, which will be really exciting, because then I'll get to teach you guys, which is what I love doing. And so I think that that's definitely probably something I'm most excited about.
Yeah, well, that's super cool, and I'm really excited about you jumping into dahlias too. I planted dahlias for the first time this year, because you came and saw my farm, and like kind of did it without knowing anything. Jill was like walking through and she's like, oh my gosh, what variety is this? And I'm like,
how little she did, it was so impressive. I was so jealous because I worked hard and my dahlias were a flop, and she's like, I just threw them out. And I'm like, girl, grow more dahlias.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of how gardening goes, right? There'll be some things that, kind of my perspective of gardening, and I've shared this before, is that there is, like, you can do everything right and you can know all of the rules and all of the things, but there are so many things that are like core to that, right? Like, I had good soil, I had a bedding, good sunlight, and you know what? God just does his thing, and they grew. And like, she was like, did you like pinch them? Like, she was like asking me all these questions. I'm like, no. And she's like, how are they growing so much? And I'm like,
they weren't pinched, they weren't staked, they weren't any of the typical like maintenance for dahlias.
I didn't take care of them, is what she's saying.
And they were so abundant. She had dinner plate dahlias, I swear, that were as big as my face. They were absolutely stunning. So well done.
Thanks.
Well done.
Thanks. But it's things like that where like you grow them and you learn. And now that I know so much more, even just from like having Jill walk by and kind of like just throw a little shade at me, right? Like, no, she did it in like the most loving and like, what? You didn't care for these? What do you mean? Like, she actually thought I had like put a lot of work into them.
I thought she was joking when she said, no, I just threw them in the ground. I was like, wait, like, oh, you're being serious. Okay. So I was just like, okay, well, you could like, and the deal is that she had abundant flowers, right?
Yeah.
But had she done those two simple steps,
would
she
have
would
had
have gotten even more. Not that you even really needed that.
Right.
So again, figure out what you need. But if that was your goal, is to be able to make so many bouquets in a season to take to a farmer's market or a vendor event.
Well, and it's good. It's good to learn that, because now going into next year, I'm about to split all of my bulbs, and there are not bulbs, my tubers. Tubers. About to split my tubers. I clearly need to take my flowers. I'm about to split all of my tubers, and there's some that I want to send to Jill because they're just. I ended up with some really cool varieties, which like I don't even know where I got them. I like was buying random. I don't know. It's, again, I didn't like put that much effort into it, but now that I know better, next year I'm going to do better, right? I'm planning to like move them all. I want to have a whole row. I do want to support them because I saw how they all fell over. I saw that they would probably do better if they had a little bit of support. I'm going to pinch them now because I know I'll get more flowers, like more blooms out of it. Like there's so many things now that I want to dive into research and I want to learn more about because of Jill, and because she shared that knowledge even at the beginning of her journey, which I feel like is really, like, that says a lot about the way that we can help and encourage each other no matter where you are on your journey, right? You guys know I'm by no means an expert in any of this. We're sharing our journey because I want to encourage you that if you, you know, like if you like me work in corporate America, or even if you don't and you just have a lot of things going on and you want to start something new, like you can start anywhere and you can be successful. Like you don't have to know everything before you put the first seed in the ground or the first tuber in the ground. Like you can just throw it in, and like if they would have flopped, like other things I grew did flop, right? If they would have flopped, then I would have called Jill and been like, hey, my dahlias didn't do anything. And she'd been like, well, did you do all these things? And I would have been like, no. She'd be like, okay, well, next year, try those. And now I know. And so next year, I'm going to try those because I want to increase the harvest I was able to get. And that's true for anything, especially on a farm. Like, we don't know anything about what we're doing. Like we're learning as we go, and we're doing a lot of research, and we're trying not to be ignorant as we go into things, specifically around animals, and like when it involves other like living beings, like we're trying to be really, you know, informed on those, but it's still our first time. And so I think there's a lot that kind of goes into that. So Jill, I said last question, but I have another.
Throw it at me.
You know, it's just kind of how I roll. But like, so if somebody is like thinking about starting all of this, not just gardening, but starting everything from scratch, like what's the most important lesson that you learned in doing that? And like, how would you share that?
Like going all in at first? Yeah. Ooh, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it because it gets overwhelmed and you're trying to learn so many different things. So say maybe you have chickens and then you want to get goats that need milking, and then you've got this huge vegetable garden that's super demanding, and then you have flowers that can also be a bit more, you know, time management as far as they're a bit more fickle if you're starting them from seed and things like that. That I think you would be doing yourself a disservice and your garden and your animals a disservice. And that's what I learned, is that I dove all in and I didn't really do any of it well because I was struggling in so many different areas, versus had I started with one thing, learned what I needed to learn about chickens, figure out the purpose of those chickens, felt good about that routine, added a few garden beds, and then a few years, you know, the next year added a few more, and the next year added a few more. I think you're able to just do those things better when you have the time to really pour and learn, you know, and research what those things are. Now, if you have experience in that, or maybe like you and your husband are doing this full time, or you and your partner, whatever that looks like, maybe that's more achievable, and it could be like, okay, you have the animal goals and this is your responsibility, and I'll take over, you know, vegetable and flower production. But if you're especially doing this by yourself and you think, I want to buy all this land and I just want to jump all in, the boat's gonna sink. And it's
gonna be hard. It's gonna be hard.
It is gonna be hard.
You can do it, but it's hard.
You can do it, but more than likely you're gonna have a lot of failed crops. You're probably even gonna have like death in animals because it's too much. And I think that really, like, kind of circling back to what we mentioned earlier, why do we put this expectation on somebody that to be sustainable or to be a homesteader or a farmer or a gardener that you have to do it all
in, right?
And immediately? I really think that that's honestly not even a sustainable approach to things at all. And if you're like, it's just, in my opinion, it's not sustainable because you're not serving each of those things well and to the best of your ability because you're so stretched thin, which is what I found. Is that all these things. And so when we actually just recently bought our farm, we got rid of some animals. We got rid of all of our meat rabbits, and we're like, you know what? We're gonna spend time building up the land and making sure that we feel good about it. And we're gonna learn about an animal, and then we're gonna bring them onto the farm. So my husband learned about pigs, and we brought pigs on. And obviously, I knew about vegetables, so we could easily kind of, you know, triple our vegetable production. I mean, that's all we have is, you know, we have some friends' goats on there right now, but just pigs and chickens are the only animals we have. And until we have time to dive into dairy animal and feel good about adding that on to our farm, we'll just wait.
Well, and there's no like perfect timeline, right? That's gonna look different for everyone depending on kind of the knowledge that you have and like where your starting point, where you're farming, the people, the community you have around you. Like, there are so many variables that go into that. And also like your capacity too. Like Kevin and I, a lot of people are probably watching this and being like, oh, she jumped into the deep end. I did jump in we did jump in the deep end, but we also had circumstances that allowed us to do that and do it in like a responsible manner. Specifically, I mean, to Jill's point, like I had gardened before. This was a huge growth in my garden. Like I pretty much like tripled my gardening space this year. But in terms of like everything else that we added to the farm, like Kevin had the ability this year to have a lot of flexibility and to learn a lot and spend a lot of time with the animals. We did a lot of research and like meeting people before we added each animal. Like there are things like that. And so your timeline might not look like my timeline. It might not look like Jill's timeline. It could be faster. It could be slower. But I think that it's important to not feel like you're pressured to jump into the deep end and to recognize things in yourself where like maybe you're underwater and you feel like you should add something else. It's important to recognize that. And it's helpful if you have someone else to do that for you. Like Kevin is definitely my like pull her back down to earth kind of guy. Like he'll be like, well, you know, I've talked about quail. I really want to add quail. You guys know we haven't added quail yet. It's because it's like a whole nother undertaking. And like, you know, when I wanted to add them a month ago, they would be like tiny birds that are just starting to lay right now when we're about to go into the winter. Quail are not a very hardy bird. Like it would be hard to keep them alive. Like these are things that like Kevin made sure he did the research and was like, listen, we're not gonna, like we're not setting ourselves up for success if we start this in the winter because it's hard. Like people who do this for a living struggle in the winter. So we should start in the spring so that by the time it gets to winter, we know what we're doing, right? And we're not like, oh, this was a bad setup or like this, like we don't want to lose anything in the meantime. So it depends on like all of those factors, and having someone who kind of like brings you down to earth and is like, okay, Jill, might not be time, right? Right? Like I know we talked about your cow, and you had like said, I really want a cow, and we talked about like what do cows need, and I was telling her about our experience with Jeannie, who's a Dexter, who's a really, I think, a great breed if you have a smaller homestead or you're busy and you don't have a lot of time and you just want to be able to calf share and have like a really organic relationship with your dairy animal. Dexters are a great option because they don't produce so much excess that like I'm not processing dozens of gallons of milk a week. Like I have maybe like 2 or 3 depending on how often we milk, and that's really manageable for our family. And so we were talking about that and like Jill's kind of like desire to have an animal like that, and we talked about like you don't have the pasture for it right now.
No, so we've given ourselves a 2-year timeline. We think that is reasonable to spend 2 years building pasture and gaining knowledge. And I think that when you should have kind of, you should have the weight of that no matter what animal it is. Even if it's chickens, you hear a lot of times like, oh, that's the gateway animal, and it's true, but still they require, you know, depending on what you're using them for, like they still require things. And so know that like I have everything to where I could bring a dairy animal on my farm. I live on a farm like 5 acres. I could bring a dairy
infrastructure.
I have infrastructure, I have barns, I could. But it would not be the best life for that cow, and I would walk into it blindly, and I know that's not sustainable. That's not stewarding anything well. My animals are the earth. And so we're giving ourselves a 2-year timeline to build pasture, to gain knowledge, and then you feel better equipped. Like I feel better about it, and instead of a problem coming up and my cow getting mastitis and me being like, oh my gosh, who do I know? Who can I phone a friend? I will already know immediately what I need to do or if I need to call.
Because you will have like put in that legwork. And I think that's important, and it's important to like share that even you, where you are like in a season of waiting on something. And it's good. It like gives you, and it also like builds that anticipation. So like, and I remember that from like when I wanted my cow. I actually just had a memory pop up on my phone that like a year ago, maybe a month ago, a year ago. So like last October, I was sitting and reading Keeping a Family Cow. That was the first thing I did before I even, and like Jeannie didn't come to our farm until May. Like I started doing that research and like reading everything I could and like learning a lot about it, learning about breeds, like trying to figure out where did I stand on this before I just like brought one onto my farm. And I think that's important. It's very important. And it's true for everything, whether you want farm animals or not. Like,
and even if you're not wanting farm animals, you don't want vegetable production, say maybe you know, the flower thing really stuck with you, it still takes research. You still have to have some things in place. And so I think it's just a good practice to kind of think instead of
small.
Instead of just like instinct, I'm going to jump into this, like maybe give yourself a rule, like give me a 3-day rule where I can really process this. And don't let like the hype and the excitement take over. I'm the worst about that, right? And so I think that sometimes it may look like, okay, let me have 3 days to process it, talk to someone else, and get someone's opinion. And I do think it's good bringing in an outside opinion. Like we had a farm consultant who's walked our property, and we're doing things based off the advice that they've given us, and that's like professionally what they do. And so I think just knowing that is, you know, as you do it more and you kind of fail a few times, you figure out, okay, I'm not going to do that again.
Fair. Well, Jill, I appreciate you sitting down with me. You guys, make sure you check out the Stewarding Well podcast. You can find us at thestewardingwellpodcast.com, over at Stewarding Well Podcast on Instagram. We are super excited to share all of that with you. I'm super excited to continue recording with Jill. And it's always good to hang out with my sweet friend. So thank you. You always have a space at our table. Until next time.
Bye.